And that's us. So hello everyone. I am chatting today with Bhagya Somashekhar, who is a PhD candidate at Oxford University doing English studies. And Bhagya, please meet my students from PG1 and PG2. These are students at St. Xavier's University, Kolkata. And we are just going to have a little chat today. I thought it would be useful. Some of you are interested in higher studies. Some of you are interested in higher studies abroad. So it'll be a general chat, not just about going to the UK or studying in the UK, but sort of just, I'll be asking many questions about the academic life in general and what's it been like. We're both early career academics, and I think we're both planning to kind of stick to it. So we should be able to give you some sense of what the career path is like for the next 5 to 10 years. And particularly, we can talk about what it's like going abroad, okay? So I'll start by just introducing Bhagya. Bhagya, well, I'll just informally introduce her. I've known her for many years. We go way back. She is my friend and junior from JNU. Bhagya is from Bangalore. Bhagya, where did you do your undergrad?
I studied at Mount Carmel College. So I did my bachelor's there, as well as my PU as well, 11th and 12th.
This is in Bangalore, right?
Yeah, Mount Carmel College is an autonomous college, but also affiliated with Bangalore University.
Oh, great. And so it was a 3-year English degree?
Same yeah, it was a 3-year degree, but it wasn't an English degree. I didn't do an honors degree. Okay. So I did a triple majors in journalism, psychology, and English literature. Yeah. So okay, the first time I did a full-fledged English literature course was when I joined JNU for my master's.
Okay, that's interesting because and that's a good thing about the JNU system because they allow that. So I mean, for instance, I know that St. Xavier's, as of now, their MA program is only open to people who have a BA degree English honors. So I think it's a really good thing that, and that's more like the American system where you can do an undergrad in several areas, right?
Something like that, but I think the American undergrad system has a minor and a major format.
Right.
So it was slightly different in that it was completely 3 majors.
Okay, cool. All right, and so that got you through for the MA program in JNU. And so you're what, one batch junior to me or 2 batches junior to me?
I think it's 2 batches.
2 batches, right?
Because you were in the you started in
MPhil 2011.
When I started my MA, I think.
Right, yeah. So then you did your MA in JNU, and that was good. So since some of my kids here are interested in, JNU as well, prospectively, for their higher studies, we could talk about maybe 2-3 minutes about JNU as well. So how did you find the MA in JNU? Because I didn't do the MA there.
It was interesting. I think for me, because I came from a background which wasn't an honors English degree, it wasn't necessarily always productive because I would have ideally liked a more rigorous grounding in a canonical course.
I felt that as well. When I looked at the syllabus for the MA in JNU, it's very kind of specialized. So it's sort of, it's curated according to the professors, and that there being a very small faculty strength, I think what happens is that it ends up being a very specialist MA. Am I right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but it was also great in that it gave me so much freedom to, like you said, curate the courses that I really wanted to choose and cultivate my interest in certain specialized areas and also continue research in those areas as well. So it had its advantages and disadvantages, I think.
And
just one thing, Prayag, when you say this is a PG 1 and 2 course, do you mean they're master's students?
They're master's students, yeah. They're master's students. So they've already, started their master's here, but I'm just generally trying to tell them a little bit about JNU because, so my experience, JNU is a good place. I would say, in fact, the department has become even stronger of late. A certain person has left temporarily, I believe. Certain other people have joined who are very good, I believe.
Well, that certain person was your
this is on record, Bhagya. So let's be politic.
I'll stop shaming you.
It's all good. It's all good. That's fine. I've heard many years of criticism for my supervisor choices. But anyway, never mind. We learn from all experiences in life. So what was I saying? I was saying, yeah, JNU. So JNU complicated money. What's happening slowly is that there has been a kind of attempt to, one particular political culture is trying to battle another, and there has been, as you know, JNU has been a left bastion for decades, and I think that is there is a concerted effort to displace, to dislodge that particular culture. Um, that is very much underway. I believe for a few years they had stopped taking new students for their MPhil, PhD, right? Bhagya, do you know about that?
Yeah. This was immediately after the whole episode happened in February 2016. So I think for a couple of years, they completely had to suspend any intake of research students, MPhil and PhD onwards.
And
But I'm
have
not sure
they?
whether that started, but they're certainly not taking in students in the same volume they used to before. So
Right.
fewer students for sure.
Yeah. So that's what I hear as well. I think, and you guys can, I'll unmute you for a second, but has anyone looked into, whoa, okay. All right. Has anyone looked into the JNU application scene? Have you guys checked out if there are forms out and anything? You should. You
Yes.
should please check it out because it's a good place to go. Okay, I'm muting again. If you have anything to say, please unmute yourselves. But look into JNU because I think the intake has begun again for PhD programs. And as I said, the faculty is very good. Many new people have joined from Delhi University. There's been a kind of exodus for at least 2 or 3 people have joined. The PhD and MPhil programs are likely to be somewhat exclusive in the sense that the seat, the capacity isn't very high, but it would be worth applying. And likewise, for those of you planning to do PhDs, and I'll say this for even those who are aspiring to do higher studies abroad, it does not hurt to sort of increase your options, right, Bhagya? So apply everywhere. Apply to DU, apply to CU, apply to as many places as you can because in India it's cheap. So we can begin actually to talk about that. I'm not really going in order of the questions that I had in mind, but actually let's so Bhagya, can you unmute yourself actually because I have you muted. Yeah.
Okay.
So I was going to ask
I
Bhagya,
am unmuted.
yeah.
Yeah.
So how did you decide to do higher studies, and can you tell us about how and at what point you decided you want to be an academic? Because I believe you were doing some journalism stuff, right, while you were an MA student?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, my undergrad was, like I said before, it was in journalism, psychology, and English literature. That was also partly because I thought I would be entering into some form of journalism, print likely, at a later point. But then I also had the choice of doing a master's in a specific area afterwards, and I've always been passionate about literature, so it was a fairly obvious choice for me. So I certainly didn't set out thinking that I was going to become an academic, and I'm not sure if I can be categorized as an academic right now. I'm still a research candidate. But yeah, so the first choice was just to look at MA options, and JNU's department was a fairly prestigious one, and I'd heard a lot about it, and I also wanted to live in a different city. So all of these factors came together. And the other reason was also because I wanted to do journalism, and Delhi is sort of the media headquarters of India, so that was another factor.
So, but during your MAs, you were continuing to do a bit of work in journalism, right? Freelance work.
Yeah, so I did internships in Bangalore as well as in Delhi, mostly print internships in newspapers and magazines. So mostly over summers, I spent a month or two interning at different places.
Right. So to my master's students, that's a bit of good advice, which is use your time well. I mean, right now you have a lot of free time, so we're doing that reading camp. Some of you are doing it, some of you aren't. That's fine. But do as many things as you can, because things like this matter a lot when your employers look at your CV. If they see that you have a bit of work experience, it really helps. All right. So particularly when you get holidays, when whether it's winter or summer, try not to spend that time idly. All right. Some of you are doing stuff, not if you've done a bit of freelance work or a bit of anything to earn a bit of money, right? Yeah. Okay. So that's good. That's good. Keep that going. Yeah. Bhagya. So let's continue chatting. So while doing your MA, you were doing some work in journalism, and then sort of what led you to the decision to do a PhD? And when you decided to do a PhD, what steps did you take? As in, where all did you apply, and what was the logic behind your decision?
So after interning at a couple of places, I think I came to realize that journalism wasn't necessarily for me because I didn't particularly enjoy working in a newsroom. And of course, there were other kinds of journalism I did dabble in, which is features writing, which is what I was inclined towards. But because I was confronted with a lot of uncertainty about what I wanted to do next, and I wasn't particularly certain about pursuing journalism after that. I thought I'd do an MPhil,
Right.
partly to give myself some stall time
Right.
to think about what I wanted to do next, and also get a glimpse into what
Agreed.
research
Yeah.
entailed.
Yeah.
So
So
I think doing an MPhil takes both.
yeah. So I would say this to all of my students. See, I had the same thought process. So, I was actually maybe before Bhagya, because Bhagya is very keen on journalism. I was leaning towards academia a bit earlier than that. I'd always kind of wanted to. Both my parents are teachers. I think Bhagya, your parents are doctors, right?
No, my dad's a doctor. Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, I had academia in my mind.
Academia is
Yeah.
not in my family, so perhaps
Yeah.
that's why it also didn't occur to me as a viable option
Right.
to begin with.
So, I mean, I had a lot of family support always for academia, and I kind of wanted to do it from slightly earlier, but I was a little bit unsure. I was a very casual student, actually. I found myself doing well because, whatever, I have certain innate abilities, maybe, and I'm good at last minute studies. But to be very honest, I don't want to be a bad example to my students. You should all work very hard. But I took it a bit easy during my undergrad. Masters, I started to think, acha, if I can get paid for reading books, then I'd like to do that. So, and then I thought, same as Bhagya, I thought MPhil, let me do an MPhil. It's a interim thing. While I'm doing the MPhil, if I want to work, I can do some work. And I did that as well. So like Bhagya was doing journalism, I was doing publishing. So I started with content writing when I was an undergrad. And then during my ME, I did this course called Editing and Publishing from Jadavpur. And with the help of that, I got a lot of freelance work. And I was doing that right through up until my MPhil. I was doing that. But then I realized eventually that I don't really enjoy proofreading. It's something that I could do, but it's not something that I really enjoyed doing. So gradually my mind started turning towards academics. And while I was doing, another good thing I would say, Bhagya, would you agree, is that, see, the culture of a place really makes a difference. And when you're in JNU, there's an academic climate. Everyone is very political. Everyone is very engaged with the world. People are reading. And I was very lucky in that my roommate was a leftist activist. He was a political activist, and he had a great collection of books. You remember Shakil's collection,
Yeah.
right? He used to spend all his money. The guy used to bum my cigarettes, used to, line marify girls using my booze. But, he spent all his money on books. So what happened is that just accidentally I ended up reading a lot because I had a roommate like this. Bhagya, what was your experience like in the hostels?
JNU was interesting and also very different for me because I think initially when I joined JNU, I had a bit of a culture shock because Bangalore educational institutions are just completely different compared to what Delhi was like. Maybe JNU is not necessarily representative of what DU and Delhi education generally is like, but it was certainly, I felt a palpable difference. So my first year, I think I took a lot of time to really get adjusted to
I've
JNU.
spotlighted you, by the way. Okay, you're occupying
Yes, it's making me extremely self-conscious.
All right,
but,
okay. Then I can unspotlight you as well. I'm just learning how this app works. Okay, yeah, continue.
No, I think I took a while to get adjusted to JNU and what the climate entailed, living by myself as well. But then the master's course, like is extremely intensive at JNU. So I didn't really have too much time to waffle about. I had to get into work as soon as possible. And of course, being surrounded by people who were equally invested in the subject as I was, and being exposed to new kinds of thinking, political especially, which I hadn't been before because where I studied in Bangalore and most other institutions in Bangalore, they're really apolitical. So I felt that is a fairly pointed difference as well. So I think all in all, JNU was just a completely different world to be immersed into, and I enjoyed every bit of it.
So, I mean, that's interesting because my experience was a little bit different. I was coming from 5 years of Jadavpur, so I was sick of politics by then, and I wanted a little bit of space to retreat into myself. And that's what I got at JNU. It's a bit of like I led a slightly hermit-like existence in that I was mostly in Narmada 124, and I had my books and I was, I socialized a bit. But anyway, so let's move on from there. But JNU was a good environment for, I think, for both of us. So I was going to ask, what kind of books did you like reading in the years leading up to your higher studies, and what were your early areas of academic interest?
Well, there wasn't any particular kind of book that I gravitated towards. I mean, fiction for sure, largely fiction. I don't think I read too much nonfiction in my BA days or MA. So I essentially read everything I could get my hands on. I think I was
Bhagya is an
never.
avid reader. She's a much more intense reader than me. I mean, she reads a lot. So yeah, go on. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's certainly declined lately because now my readings become more focused towards my
That
dissertation,
happens. That happens.
and of
So
course
yeah,
teaching reading as well.
agreed.
But yeah, I think during undergrad years and in MA as well, I just read extremely intensively.
And I completely agree. And here, let me just put it back to the gallery view for a minute, because students, you can, one thing I'll say is that in your MA, the advantage of the MA is that this is the most comprehensive that your education will get. You will be reading a lot. And what happens as you progressively go up the ladder is that it gets narrow. It tends to get narrow. In the Indian MPhil system, thankfully, it's a kind of chill system. You don't have to meet your supervisor that much. So then you have a lot of time to read. But what happens is that naturally, when you're doing research in one narrow area, and the PG2 students, you already know this because you've done a dissertation, you start to read a lot of books in one specific area. So there is a tendency to get a little ghettoized. And that had happened to me during my PhD as well, and I suppose Bhagya as well. But partly, I guess what happens if you're going to a good institution is that there is a broader environment around you where other people are doing work. And one thing I liked about the UK system, so again, to sort of jump ahead a little bit, but one really good thing I felt at Queen's, and Bhagya, you can tell me about your experiences, but there they really encouraged, and there was a systematic way, in which they did this, unlike Indian universities, where every month we used to have a graduate studies meeting where all PhD students in the English department would get together and would have a chat. So one person or two people in each session would give a small presentation on what their research has been in the last few months, basically. So that happened, and of course there were lots of conferences happening, events happening, literary events, cultural events. So one got simultaneously, yes, you're getting ghettoized as you're learning more and more in a narrow area, but there is a broader academic culture, and I suppose that is thriving in Oxford. So maybe we can jump ahead a little and you can pitch in about that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Because the UK PhD, like you know, is a completely different format compared to the US one. So we don't really have any taught years before the research begins. So when I came here, that was what I was sort of also a bit perplexed by, because I didn't really have a background in Oxford, neither did I know anyone here. And I had so much free time seemingly in my hands. So frankly, but it also means that you've got to build a structure for yourself. So I mostly went to seminars, and there's a thriving culture of all kinds of like seminars on different subjects, different areas in different.
Hang on, Bhagya, you've got cut off. I think I might be having some internet problems. Yeah, you're back. Sorry, did you guys get that? Could you just repeat the last minute or so, Bhagya? Sorry, I lost you there.
Yeah, no, I just said that there is certainly a thriving intellectual culture comprised of seminars on literally every field under the sun. So you've got to really pick and choose and create a different intellectual social calendar for yourself.
Right.
So that also varies from term to term. So Oxford's year is broken up into 3 terms, and each term contains a different set of events and different seminars. So depending on your work obligations in any particular term, any particular week, you can design a completely different social calendar for yourself. So that's what I did largely. And where graduate seminars are concerned, there are different forms that are available. And I think there was one sort of makeshift seminar that me and my cohort had organized right at the beginning in the first year to fine-tune our research proposals before the first assessment came up. So, but after that, I think we sort of drifted away and got more immersed in our specific strands in the field. But besides that, because I work largely in post-colonial literature. There's a post-colonial literature seminar, writing and theory seminar, that is, which I attend regularly, and I also help organize.
I see. Actually,
so
could you break these concepts down a little bit, because the students here are not used to, the research culture hasn't hit the MA level, at least in our university as yet, so much. So just the whole idea of what are seminars, what happens at seminars, just sort of.
So it's essentially a seminar is just the Oxford name for a lecture. So when I say the postcolonial writing and theory seminar, it's a research group which is convened by two professors in postcolonial literature. That's Professor Anki Mukherjee and Professor Alika Barma. So we meet every even Thursday in the term. So that's every alternative Thursday, and one invited speaker is spotlighted, and it's open for everyone to attend, but it's mostly attended by English undergraduates or postgraduate and research students who are interested in that particular area or lecture. And there's usually a 40-minute lecture followed by a Q&A afterwards. So this is the seminar format followed by mostly all other subjects as well.
Not just... And it's a UK-wide system. So we had the same thing. We had a graduate seminar. So once a month, as I said, the graduate students would meet, and it was open to everyone again, but mainly English grads. And then I went for the 18th century studies reading group. So we, there would be many things happening, many events, but once a month there would be a paper, basically a lecture by a senior figure in 18th century studies in the UK who would be invited to come to Queen's and speak. And then there would be a chat, and usually in the UK it's accompanied by going to the pub later. So you have the seminar, and then you go off to the pub and you get to know them a little bit better there. So
that's
exactly speaking of this, I think this needs to be introduced, not the pub part maybe, but the rest of it, the seminar system would be a wonderful thing. What we have in Xavier's is guest lectures. So every once in a while on Saturdays we organize a guest lecture, which is, I suppose, comparable to some extent, but the seminar system
used to happen in JNU as well, as far as I remember. We would get a lot of invited speakers too, maybe not with the same frequency.
But there was invited speakers, but it's not a regularized kind of thing. So that's the difference. Okay, but hang on, let's step back just a little bit and go back to what made you kind of decide to do higher studies abroad. Can you talk us through that process?
Well, since I had already studied for about 5 years in Bangalore, 11th onwards, that is, and another 5 years in JNU because I did my master's as well as MPhil there, both 2 years each. I thought I needed to be exposed to different academic environments as well, and going abroad for a PhD would give me that opportunity. So that's why I decided I'd apply for PhDs elsewhere, and I mostly applied for PhDs in the UK and the US.
Right. So we'll talk about that, but I mean, just to give my perspective on that, I agree. And I mean, to ask someone why they applied to Oxford is kind of a duh question. It's like, I mean, who wouldn't want to study in Oxford? But the point is that, so my process, I was doing my MPhil PhD, and I was talking to various people, and my professors also said, because I was interested in academia, and they said that I was, good enough at it. Clearly my grades were reflecting that. So they said that, why don't you apply, think about going abroad? And Makrand, for Professor Paranjpe, whatever else you might think about him, he was quite proactive in helping me in these ways. So he did encourage me, and so that's what I did. I thought I also wanted the experience. Of course, it's really nice, and you think about it, I don't regret a minute. I don't regret my decision. It's so exciting. I think that's part of what draws people to it. You experience another country. It's not so much for me, at least, about the first world and the material side of it or your standard of living as such, but it's really the culture and the exposure to new things. And this is one thing where I felt, because I've been to the US, my sister lives in the US, so I have felt that the climate is slightly different in the UK as opposed to the US. Again, this may be my blinkered perspective. Bhagya, you can weigh in on this, but generally I felt that US culture, maybe not in the universities, but outside universities, there is this kind of, I don't know, I got this great feeling of hollowness. Of there's this consumerist culture and everything is about consumption, and I felt a lack of deep cultural roots. One thing you feel about the UK is that it's steeped in this kind of, it's in its own, it's in its sense of itself, and in a sense of its, self-reflexive sense of its culture, of its literature, of its history, which, I mean, I'm not trying to erase to thousands of years of Native American culture, but the fact is it's not that visible. What you get a sense of in America is a sense of a culture looking for its roots. And therefore you have this kind of pioneer mentality of Americans questing, looking for, discovering their identity. Where do I lie? And, you see this in the way they engage with the world outside as well. They're always looking for their roots in European countries. Oh, my great-great-grandmother's from here, etc. But generally US versus UK, because, I also applied to the US. I didn't get through. And I'll talk about that. Bhagya, you could also talk about your US application experience. But part of, I got through to only Queen's, so I went finally. But part of, I think, what drew me to the UK particularly is this sense of its deep cultural roots, particularly for our subject. There's, it's everywhere, from statues to monuments to libraries. Do you agree?
I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't be able to say in such generalized terms, I think, because I really haven't spent too much time in the US to begin with. Although in terms of academia, well, at least at the PhD level, there's certainly a stark difference in that. I mean, at the very basic and concrete level, they do have 2 years of coursework, which helps you both intellectually as well as, I think, socially, because you do get a sense of a cohort more than I did in the UK, just starting off with a research project.
So to just break this down for my students, those of you who don't know, the US system is a 6-year system usually, in which the first 2 years is a compulsory MA. And one good thing about the US system, and I know the difference between the UK and the US, the UK degrees are usually research only. So it's a 3-year, you get funding for only 3 years. Bhagya, you and I both got 3-year funding packages, right?
Yeah. Those are typical packages for the UK. It's very rare.
3 years, but they let you take 4 years to finish. I know of people who've taken longer than 4 years, but they greatly discourage it. So it's 3 to 4 year degree. The US, on the other hand, is a very rigorous, it's like intense training. And I can tell you that their masters, the first 2 years, and it's compulsory, you can't get out of it. It will chew you up and spit you out. I know people who've broken down because of the rigor of their MA system. It's insane.
That's a wonderful way to encourage your students to.
No, I mean, you will learn so much. You will learn so much, whether you like it or not. But the US system, you come out, I would say, in some ways, a more rigorously trained product than us. The other benefit about the US system, again, as far as I know, is that they start encouraging you to apply for jobs from the 4th year onwards. So it gives you a buffer period towards the tail end of your PhD. You get some time to figure things out and apply, and they encourage you to get into the system. It's easier to remain behind. UK, it's 3 years. For us, we had a couple of these sessions about jobs and applications, but there wasn't much of a route for Indian students, foreign students to easily remain behind. Sure, you can do it if you're that determined, but when you're pressured to finish within 3 years, on top of that, a job hunt starting it, Bhagya, why don't you, if you're comfortable talking about this, I understand you haven't finished yet, but would you like to weigh in on that?
On what aspect?
The sort of the kind of the way in which maybe the US versus UK, we're talking about the benefits of a kind of protracted US system as opposed to the UK system. So
no, that's something I certainly considered before applying, and I applied across the board. Actually, I applied to almost 10 places, including UK universities as well as US universities. And I got into a few places, almost every place I applied to in the UK. But the problem is acceptance doesn't necessarily amount to funding, right?
Right. That's the other thing I wanted to talk about. The difference, again, to break this down for those who don't know much about this, the US versus UK difference is that in the US, if you're offered a seat, you are typically guaranteed funding, usually. In the UK, it doesn't always. Because I had applied through a special program. So my PhD was what you call a themed PhD. So the fellowship, the grant that they gave me was for research on a particular topic. I had the flexibility to change that topic eventually, but I had to send an application based on a particular, it was like a conference, it was like a seminar, a kind of conference alert that they put up on their website saying, here is a theme, send us application. So I sent an application and the funding was guaranteed. If you got the thing, if they offered you a seat, you get the funding with that. But generally in the UK system, you get an offer and then you have to procure your own funding, right, Bhagya? So could you tell us about that?
No, not necessarily. I think both formats are available, where UK universities offer a PhD and they also have various scholarships of their own. So the format that I have right now in Oxford is that I applied for a PhD and my proposal was accepted and I got a university scholarship.
Right.
So initially when I applied to the UK and the US, that was quite crucial for me in deciding. Firstly, in terms of duration, I didn't really want to go into a US PhD which would go up to almost 6 to 7 years, because I'd already done 5 years of postgraduate study in India. Right. So I got into CUNY as well, which is the City University of New York, and it's got a fabulous faculty. But the problem with CUNY is that Yeah, the problem with CUNY is that it's a government funded institution, and funding is always quite precarious there. So that was
Wasn't
one.
Robert Young wasn't Robert Young in City University of New York?
No, Robert Young is currently in NYU
Somewhere
Abu
in
Dhabi.
the Abu Dhabi. Yeah. Okay, he was in
David
NYU.
Harvey
Yeah.
is in CUNY. Linda Martinaco is in CUNY. Lots of really big names. But essentially, yeah. So I got into CUNY and I got into a few places in the UK. But a lot of these places hadn't offered funding for me yet at that point. And Oxford, and I think I've been shortlisted for the Felix as well.
Oh.
But before I went in for the Felix interview,
Hmm.
Oxford came through with this university funding called the Clarendon Scholarship. And that was giving me pretty much everything I wanted, a full scholarship package. So
Right.
that sort of decided it for me.
Hmm.
Funding as well as the 3 to 4 year duration.
Could you actually tell my students a little bit about the applying to the Felix and other such things? See, I didn't have to go through this process, so I don't know anything about it. But typically, I believe there are, various organizations, including Indian government ones. There's a Nehru scholarship, there's a Rhodes scholarship, is not Indian. But so, Bhagya, why don't you tell us about this?
Yeah, Rhodes Scholarship, all of these scholarships are governed by external bodies. So they have a separate application process. So I applied to the Commonwealth Scholarship, which was the only scholarship I think I applied to, which was governed by an external body. But essentially for the Commonwealth Scholarship, which is also a format followed by most other external body scholarships, is that you've got to first apply to the scholarship body and then get in touch with a prospective supervisor in the UK with a potential proposal and get their word saying that that they will offer a supporting statement for you, which you can then attach to your application to these scholarships.
Okay, wait, this is complicated. I'm not quite clear on this. So you apply first to the external body that offers the scholarship?
No, so how it works is first you contact a prospective supervisor in the UK regarding your proposal and ask them to submit your... Sorry?
By email rather than through an
by
application.
Email, of course. I mean,
so this is not a kind of not through the university's application process.
No, by email you contact potential supervisors directly, asking them if they'll be willing to take you on should you get accepted. So it's not them offering you a supporting statement doesn't mean that they will accept you at the application level either. So it's merely a supporting statement for the Commonwealth Scholarship. So once you get your word that they will offer you a supporting statement, you essentially have to prepare the application for the Commonwealth Scholarship, which will also include a space where they can offer they can attach their supporting statement. So it's
can I just ask about this, because a supporting statement is based on what? What do they see to decide that they'll give you a supporting statement?
That they will. That should the student get accepted by the university, they will be willing to take the student on.
Sure, that's the content of it. But on what basis do they decide that they'll give you a supporting statement?
Your proposal. So you've got to get in touch with a prospective supervisor with a proposal for the PhD. So this proposal will be about 500 to 1,000 words, which will also delineate what exactly you want to work on for the 3 to 4 year degree. And it should be an original project, and it should also convince the prospective supervisor that it is a feasible project which can be completed within 3 to 4 years.
So and that's also ideally it should appeal to their specializations and interests to some extent.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think this is exactly what you would do if you were to get in touch with any prospective supervisor, which a lot of students are required to do before they start applying to the UK. It's not mandatory, but it's appreciated.
So there's a kind of gray zone here. I actually wanted to talk to you about this, because you see, it's this whole system called pre-application email, which now apparently in the US system, they're strongly discouraging it. Or I've heard that they're discouraging it. But when I was applying many, many years ago, the standard thing is to send a pre-application email. You go the process.
I don't think this applies across the board though. So the US system is completely different, because you're not judged on the basis of the proposal that you send, because your research will only begin 2 years after you start your PhD there.
Right.
So that's certainly discouraged in the US, because it might potentially create a bias. But in the UK, because it's very different, you start off directly with the research. project, it's usually encouraged that you get in touch with the supervisor.
I see. Okay, I didn't know that. That's interesting. Okay. And so, okay. So that's what you did then. So you sent your interest statement, and who accepted it? Can you tell us some details about that, if that's
So it was quite interesting because when I got in touch with my current supervisor here, who's Professor Anki Mukherjee, she specializes in Victorian literature, South Asian writings, and critical theory, and also literature and psychoanalysis. She initially declined to give me a supporting statement for the Cornwell Scholarship because she had already agreed to give that to someone else. So I got in touch with someone in Cambridge and I got a supporting statement for that. But like eventually I was shortlisted for the Commonwealth, but I didn't eventually get it. So I went ahead with the Oxford application, and the Oxford application is, and I think most UK university applications, they give you a slot where you have to enter a prospective supervisor, a supervisor of your choice. So I left that slot empty, and I just sent in the application anyway. And then later my supervisor, so I got in and got accepted by the same supervisor, and she told me that it really doesn't matter whether these supporting statements come through at the beginning or whether it's been promised to someone else, because that's not really the final word.
it's not binding.
Yeah, it's not really the final thing, because what really matters ultimately is that your proposal should be able to stand on its own. And if it's the strongest in the pile and you're choosing, say, 4 students out of 100, it really all boils down to your proposal as well as your transcripts, your prior academic performance.
Right. So I was like, let's talk about that for a bit, because there are a number of factors that weigh in, but clearly, at least as far as I could understand, because I've spoken to my supervisor about this, Daniel Roberts, and the kind of process that he had to go through when the applications came in, and he did say that the most weightage is given to the proposal. Your marks matter to some extent, but not so much. In fact, I've heard of some strange cases. In Jadavpur, I knew someone, not in the English department, film studies department, who barely scraped through with a 61% for his master's, but he got a full scholarship to Harvard. So mysterious things happen. So it's worth applying if you have the funds. Now, that's another thing we can talk about actually, because UK, US, again, there's difference here. UK system will drain your pocket, because if you're applying, it makes sense to apply to at least 8 or 10 places, and there is a application fee. You have to give the GRE, you have to give the TOEFL, and so you're looking at an investment of close to, by now it'll be close to 1 lakh. For me, I spent around 60 on the US applications, whereas I applied only to Queen's. I was just doing it for the heck of it. I only applied to Queen's, and that was a free application. Not 1 penny was charged. And not only did they not have an application fee, they didn't require anything else. So the TOEFL I had already given, but you can kind of get an exemption if you, in some places, if you convince them of it. So Bhagya, can you tell us about this a little bit?
No, I had pretty much the same experience, because I had applied to almost 10 places, and it certainly wasn't very kind on my pocket. And for I think the UK, I applied about 4 places, and Oxbridge as well as Warwick and Queen's as well. And barring Queen's, I think all other places also charge an application fee, although not as much as the US. And like you said, the US also has these additional fees which you've got to address.
So Oxford and Cambridge, they charge a fairly hefty fee, I think, but I don't know about other UK universities. Do you know? Because
yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, besides Warwick, I didn't really apply to any other places, so I'm not very sure.
And Warwick charged an application fee?
I think typically UK application fees tend to be between 30 to 60 pounds per application.
Okay, so that's like what, 3,000?
Around 3 to 5,000 rupees each.
So, I mean, one of the things that I'd mentioned, because, we don't have unlimited funds, the really key thing is to figure out what places are likely to accept you. So you need to look at a good fit between your research interests and your strengths. So you have a profile that builds up over a number of years, and this is why it helps to be an MPhil student, because you've had more years of experience, you've gone to more conferences, your CV is stronger, you're more experienced, and that does help. Again, this is something.
And I think besides all of those factors, because I don't know how much weightage they really give to your transcripts, and there's also, I mean, you've got to also have people in these universities who will be able to read Indian transcripts, which may not always be the case. But essentially, besides the transcript, your proposal is the main element.
Yeah.
But you're also asked to provide a writing sample, which
Absolutely,
is a piece of writing of about 5 to
which is
10,000
crucial,
words. And of course, like all of those things, what Prayag just mentioned, will certainly reflect in the writing that you submit.
Exactly. So the years of experience that you have, that's where it really helps. So when I applied to the UK, when I got through to Queen's, that was after my MA and 2 years of MPhil. So I finished my MPhil. I had become a registered PhD student at JNU, and that's when I applied. So by now, by that point, I had much more experience, and my writing had improved. You know, this whole writing camp I'm putting you through right now, guys. The reason is I'm trying to short circuit your process to getting there. This is what I went through during my MPhil. I isolated myself to some extent and did a lot of reading and I did a lot of writing. I went for conferences. So that process helps a lot. So because your decision, their decision rather, is based partly on your proposal and partly on the writing sample. Writing sample is basically a term paper. How much was it for you? I think it was like 6 to 8,000 for me. Words.
Yeah, I think it was almost a 10,000 word piece, if I'm not mistaken, because I remember sending an excerpt from a long chapter in my MPhil dissertation.
Right.
So it was certainly almost between 7 to 10,000 words.
Right, and I use one of my MPhil projects, one of the assignments. That's another good thing about the JNU system. By the way, let me tell you, it's that the JNU MPhil PhD, there's very rigorous coursework. First year, and again, I took a Makran's course, and Makran gave us a shit ton of work. I'm talking about 8 in one semester. He gave us 8 assignments. And Xavier students probably hate me because I'm hardcore like this. I make you work really hard, but that one semester was the difference for me because that man, he made me work so hard that it was like a level up in a video game. All right. And so anyway, the point is that MPhil experience is certainly useful. Okay, so let me just consult my list of some of the things I wanted to ask you about. So why you choose Oxford? Of course, obvious, it's one of the best places on earth, right? Unless
no, that's not why I chose Oxford. If Oxford had given me an acceptance and hadn't given me funding, I certainly would not have accepted Oxford. So I think that's really really important to keep in mind when you're thinking
I'm taking that for granted. I mean, I don't think anyone middle class people in India can't afford. So that's one thing we haven't talked about because we're taking it for granted. You can't afford it. I mean, if you can afford to pay your way through, then I don't know how rich you are because these degrees cost a huge amount if you're not getting funded. In fact, a majority of PhD scholars are fully funded. I've hardly heard of anyone doing a PhD on their own money. Have you, Bhagya?
Yes, I know of someone who's doing it on his own money at Cambridge, an English degree, in fact, and he hasn't had the best experience because, of course, it causes an enormous amount of mental duress to be able to. A PhD is hard enough already, and to have to constantly think about money while you're writing, that can't be good. And also to come away with a huge student debt, it can't be good at all.
This is another thing we can talk about actually, US versus UK system, because see, as far as I know, UK scholarships are much more secure and healthy than US funding. US funding is often partial, it's often dependent on doing some TA-ship, compulsory TA-ship. So both for Bhagya and me, I think the teaching element of our PhDs was optional. Was it for you?
Yeah. It was optional, but certainly encouraged.
Everyone does it, more or less everyone does it, but you don't have to. Your funding is independent of teaching, right?
No, it's also encouraged fairly explicitly because everyone knows that you'll be going into the job market and competing against, say, potentially if you want to work either in the US or the UK, you'll be competing against graduates from the US. And they would have had years of teaching under their belt.
I mean, so everyone does it, but all I'm saying is the funding, there's no clause saying you have to be a TA in order to get the money. So in the US system, it's more like a salary that you get for regular TAing that starts from your first year. So as soon as you finish your MA, you start teaching and the teaching load is fairly heavy. So there it's more like a salary and often it's not a full scholarship or it's not guaranteed funding. And what I've heard a lot of students do is do some part-time work while they're doing higher studies in the US. And it could be bartending, it could be various things, but it's very difficult because you have very limited time. And in fact, even in the UK system, I have a friend of mine who's currently joined as a faculty member in Jadavpur. I think she also did her funding in the UK. She was in Scotland, I forget where, but she got some kind of partial funding. So for a couple of semesters, she had to do a bit of work to support herself. So basically, there's no uniform system anywhere. You have to do a bit of digging around and look at the university website thoroughly and explore your options. So no one can spoon feed you, although that's what I'm attempting to do right now. But the point is that you have to take some steps on your own, right?
Yeah.
So yeah.
No, there's a lot of research to be done, especially
Mm.
in the UK, because there's no systematic form of funding
Yeah.
attached to PhDs. There are various kinds of scholarships that are available, some at the university level, some at the department level. And for places like Oxbridge, which have a collegiate system, there are various scholarships and bursaries available at the collegiate level. So,
Could you
I
explain
mean,
that
you've
a
got to
little bit?
do
Because
some
I'm
of.
not familiar with the system either.
So Oxford and Cambridge, there's something similar to DU because they have about 38-ish colleges under the university. The departments are centrally based, but each college is actually an autonomous entity. And most of the undergraduate schooling takes place within colleges. And it's only at the postgraduate level that your college just becomes your social community, but you're attached to your supervisor as well as the department more than the college. So each college will also have scholarships based on subjects or based on so for instance this year I think Merton College, which is my college at Oxford, they instituted something called the Stuart Hall Scholarship, which is meant primarily for students of ethnic minorities. And I think it's for a subject in the social sciences. I'm not exactly sure which subject, but yeah, so there are various kinds of scholarships available.
And yeah, so I will tell you that another good thing about like with Queen's is that they are fairly well funded. So there's something called the Northern Bridge. Bhagya, you might have heard of Northern Bridge. So there's a group of universities in the UK, including Newcastle, I think, and a few others. So these are the Northern Bridge universities that are some, there's a special kind of funding for those universities. So they tend to get a little bit more funding. So, and there are some, so my scholarship, for instance, was specifically for South Asian students. It was called the Dell International Fellowship or Studentship. Dell is usually only for UK students, Department of Education and Learning, but they have one scholarship per year for a foreign student. And this particular year, it was particularly geared towards uh, South Asia because it was an India-centric topic. The topic was, Indian religious literature in translation, something like that. So anyway, so basically it's a very mixed bunch, very mixed kind of, you have to do your own looking up. There's only so much we can tell you. Okay, so let me look at my little list of questions again. Process of application we went through pretty much. Okay. How about the journey from acceptance letter to actually being physically in Oxford and including the visa process? Can you give us a little quick overview of that?
It's very straightforward. The visa is, of course, the most nerve-wracking part of it. But once a university offers a sponsorship letter, it's pretty much taken for granted that you will get a visa. But then, of course, it's always daunting to go to a new place if you've never been there before. And for me, it was the first time I was leaving India. But my college was very, very helpful right from the get-go, and they were constantly in touch with me. They were telling me how and when I could reach my accommodation, and they had that ready. And I'm sure that's applicable across everywhere.
So I had the same, I think same experience as student support. There's an email address, and they are very, very proactive. So whatever queries you have, they keep answering. And that's, these things have to happen in our country. Really, we need a much more rigorous PhD infrastructure. And that is, when we say go abroad and study abroad, it's not just because you go, in first world country, whatever that stuff. It's more the system. I'll encourage even going to a not so famous place in the US, whatever it is, US, UK. The point is not so much about how prestigious the place is. Now, there is one thing to keep in mind here. Listen, this is something that's very important that's come up recently. The Indian government has made it a rule, and this is quite scary, but only the top 500 universities in the world, only their degrees are considered valid. All right. Now this is freaking scary. I didn't know this, but when I applied, Queens is in the top 30. But basically, when you're applying to universities, this is something to keep in mind. If you are planning to come back to India, the government has not more than 3 or 4 years ago made it such that your degree's validity is, it's not considered fully valid for job applications unless it is on a list of, it's called the QS World Ranking System, top 500 universities. All right. I certainly know that in the Xavier's application process, one of the first things they asked you in the job interview, they didn't put it on paper actually, but um, essentially it's only happened in the last 2 years. But what happens is that they don't consider your degree, your PhD valid unless it's from this list. Okay, so I don't know if you knew about this, Bhagya, but that's recent
I,
development.
yeah, it's fairly, I think,
Yeah,
predictable.
you have nothing to worry about, but there are, I knew
I
for
just love all of these like snide digs at my
Well, I
university.
mean, it's all right. But the point is that, yeah, so for instance, I have friends who completed their degrees in the US. I won't name names, but, they studied at places that are good. The English departments are good, but the university may not be that famous. And they got funding and they're very good students. But they've come back to India and now they're struggling because, and this has only happened in the last year or two, and I don't know if this will be overturned later or not, but currently, for instance, Xavier's, there were vacancies last year and they sent their applications, but they were not even called to interview because of this QS World Ranking System. So this is something to keep in mind. When you apply to a college, it would make sense to make sure if you're planning to come back that, that it is on the QS list. Hmm.
Mm.
So, okay, journey from acceptance letter to Oxford, fine. That's basically you get the acceptance and you correspond a lot with them asking any clarifications you want.
Mm.
And then the visa, it's a bit of a pain. I messed up actually. I applied for the wrong category of visa. I had to do it all over again. So that's a bit problematic, but then you land up and it's fine. So there's no point talking about these minor things. Why don't you tell us a little about your experience at Oxford and what your daily life is like, and what's it been like the last few years?
Uh, it's been interesting, and my daily life fluctuated over the years because you have different priorities in different years of your PhD. So my first year, so your teaching obligations, even if they're optional, they only start after you've cleared the first assessment,
Mm.
and usually most universities have different kinds of first assessments, and that's called the
Yeah, yeah,
transfer of status
yeah. So it's called
here,
yeah,
where you move from being a probationary research scholar to a
yeah,
full-fledged candidate.
yeah, yeah,
So in the first year, it was mainly trying to get over that hurdle because you're still trying to figure out the system. You're still trying to understand what your subject is. You're trying to fine tune your research project, and you're also trying to produce a substantial piece of writing which you can submit for the first assessment. So that was part of my first chapter.
In fact, let's go about this in a piecemeal, like, and let's go about this in a sort of step-by-step way. So first year you said, and I agree. So this is a UK-wide system. In Queens, it's called differentiation. But basically, at the
Mm,
end of your first year, you have to produce a piece of writing which will be evaluated. They will not give you
yeah,
marks. There'll be a viva. It's like a mini
yeah,
viva. So it replicates what happens in the end. There is, for us, we didn't have an external from a separate university. We had another professor, but not your supervisor. Basically, two of them from the same English department, reading your chapter and
yeah.
giving you basically feedback. And so it's a little hurdle and it's difficult. I've not heard of too many people failing it, but it does happen sometimes. And what was that
Yeah.
like for you, Bhagya? So the differentiation.
No, it was fine for me. It was, of course, it was frankly terrifying because that
Mm,
was the first big assessment I was going to be subjected to. And so you have two internal assessors and they read your piece and they really grill you on the piece. So it was about a 1 hour interview, I think. And so this didn't necessarily happen towards the very end of the first year. I was supposed to submit around April, which is about two-thirds into the first year, and the interview followed shortly after. So after you clear that hurdle, then you're free to do other
yeah.
things. You're essentially allowed to also start teaching and
Mm,
take up assignments wherever possible.
yeah.
But
Great.
with I don't know about in
Mm,
Queens, we also had a second assessment. So in the
okay.
first year, we've got a transfer of status, and in the third year, we've got something called the confirmation of status. So again, you repeat the same process, but you submit a full length. Usually, sometimes a full length chapter because a lot of people tend to write chapters which are about 10,000 words long. Mine have tended to be fairly longer. So I submitted an edited excerpt of my second chapter for the confirmation of status. But in the second assessment, they also want you to show that after that particular point of time, how exactly do you do you intend to streamline your research and also finish it up in the remaining time available? So you're supposed to provide, again, a reassertion of the fact that you will be able to finish in the given time.
Right. Okay.
And again, it's the same format. We had internal assessors as well, and they talk to you, but it's a lot more serious in comparison with the first assessment, because at this point you're supposed to really know what you're doing with your project, and you've got to have finished at least 2/3 of the project by then.
Okay, that's interesting. We didn't have a second assessment. We had 6 monthly reports that we had to submit. There would be a small meeting every 6 months. It's it took all of 5 or 10 minutes, but one person from the department would, someone other than your supervisor would have a chat and say, is everything going all right? And they'd look at a small summary of your work. And that's basically, we had that every 6 months or every year, actually. Every year we had that, but it's not a major thing. The first hurdle was the major one. Just hold on a second. I'm just going to switch my AC off because I'm freezing. All right, just give me a minute.
Do you guys have any other questions? I mean, if you want to.
Right.
I mean, if Prayag's going to let us do that, that is.
Oh, yeah. Do you want a little QA session in the middle? Okay, let's do that.
Yeah, I mean, if you have any questions at this point.
Sure, let's do that. Let me unmute. Okay, everyone, you're unmuted. The issue, yeah. Okay, folks, anything you want to say? Can I ask the person with the TV on to switch the TV off, please? What is that? Yeah, go ahead.
Yes.
The speaker can identify yourself. I'll put you on solo. Just Shweta, it's you, right? Hang on. So I'll just mute all and I'll unmute Shweta. Okay, Shweta, go ahead. You're unmuted, so you should be able to speak. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes. So I wanted to ask that since we don't have a MPhil degree, so our resume is obviously not as strong as compared to those who do have it. So is it of absolute necessity for us to have publications to show on our resume?
No, I didn't have. At least I didn't. One sec. Wait. You're on mute. Wait.
Just
1 second.
One second. I'll switch off my fan. What I said is that since we do not have an MPhil degree, so therefore our resumes are therefore not as strong as those who do have it. So therefore I have heard from other people, but is it of absolute necessity for us to have publications to show on our resume? Do we need to get publications to show?
No, not at all, because at the MA level, I don't think anyone expects you to have proper peer-reviewed publications. Yeah. Of course, if you have any publications, certainly list them in the CV, but they're mainly interested in the elements that they ask for specifically, which are your transcripts and your writing sample, as well as your proposal, which is the primary bit.
But don't worry about... Go ahead.
The MPhil question, interestingly enough, for my Oxford application, I don't know whether they even read my CV, which I submitted, because they have separate slots which you're supposed to fill in the official application. And I hadn't listed my MPhil at that point because I hadn't received my transcript. Although I'd said something along the lines of I was doing my MPhil between this and this time. And that was apparently not registered, which I later found out. So they just, they accepted my application on the basis of the fact that I had an MA. So I'm sure this is also true of how things function everywhere else as well, because a lot of people here do also start their PhDs directly after their BA.
Yeah.
But that won't work in the Indian case unless you have an honors degree or a 4 years degree, 4-year bachelor's degree. So I don't think having an MPhil or not having it should necessarily be the problem. But of course, it relates to what we discussed earlier, in that an MPhil would also mean that you've got greater experience, you've got a lot more scholarly skills, which will reflect in other aspects of your application.
So I agree with Bhagya here. So again, forget publications. In fact, what often happens, and I've spoken to Daniel and others about this, they will, in fact, be maybe a little bit suspicious, because right now there's this whole pressure to publish culture, and there's a lot of low quality publications. You just go to Shodhbanga and see everyone is publishing left, right, and center. But if you're, if you're 22 years old and you have 10 publications, chances are you're doing rubbish publications, paid to publish. So they are not interested in your publications. Okay. In fact, if you have some conference papers, that might look good. But the point is, the CV is not the most important component. As far as I understand, it's your proposal, your writing sample, whatever email you have, whatever chat you have to convince. Basically, you have to convince one faculty member in that department that you are someone they want to take as a student. And the CV is not the most important component. Certainly, publications are not. I had no publications, but a little bit of experience makes you a better writer. So that's where the MPhil helps. And having the MPhil degree in hand doesn't hurt your chances because they know that you spent a few more years being a scholar.
Yeah, and MPhil, of course, adds a lot to your CV at the job market stage.
Yeah.
Certainly, even if it's not something that's ideally valuable at this stage.
Yeah. Okay, any further questions?
I have a question.
Go ahead,
yeah. So my question is about the letter of recommendation. How important is it? And at the same time, I did my bachelor's degree from Calcutta University, and I'm sure if you're not familiar with, the marking system is terrible there. You just can't predict the marking system, and I don't even have a 60% there, where a first class is 70% in UK. 70% is considered a first class in UK. So is marks of bachelor's that important? And along with it, how important is the letter of recommendation?
The letter of recommendation is one of the most important bits in the application. So do make sure that you're requesting letters of recommendation from people who've seen your work for some time and who observed you as a scholar. And also someone who you know will invest a lot in writing that letter of recommendation. I mean, your referee can be an amazing professor or a scholar, but if they write you a 2-line reference, then it's not really great. So you should have some rapport with this referee, and they should be able to write a fairly substantial letter of recommendation. What is the other question?
Marks.
Sorry?
She was asking about undergraduate level marks.
I'm not
that
very
important.
I'm not very sure about how they do gauge marks, because that sort of skewed scale of marking where English literature is concerned, especially because, I mean, no one really gets anything more than 60 to 70 or 75 at the most, even at the best university. So I think there's an established awareness of the fact that there is a skewed system of marking where literature is concerned, at the very least. But beyond that, I think I'm not very sure it matters terribly. Your most recent degree does matter more.
Yeah, so Ritovina, I completely agree. And I know a little bit about this because, again, it's something that I asked Daniel. But so basically, your undergraduate degree may not matter that much, but your most recent degree does. And more importantly, see, they are aware that there is no universal standard. There is no parity, right? They will get applications from Zimbabwe and India and everywhere. So there's no way to know the student standard by looking only at the marks. All right. On the other hand, not getting a first class, that might be a minor issue. But again, I think your MA degree will be given more importance. Certainly in the entire process.
And you have other parts in your application which will offset anything else that may not be transparent.
Exactly.
If grading systems aren't transparent, your writing will be fairly transparent. Your thinking in your proposal will be fairly transparent.
Exactly. Yeah. So I would say the recommendation matters a little more than marks. Now, again, with the recommendation, I got quite lucky in the sense that your recommender will follow their own policy. Now, when it came to my particular case, again, my difficult relationship with my MA supervisor, my MPhil supervisor, it was ongoing. But he was very fond of me. I had done a lot of work for him. I was his research assistant. I worked really hard for that man. And that's where it paid off. His recommendation, he showed me the recommendation. Again, this is something, he showed me a draft. He said, send me some information about what you've done in your life and I'll put something together, some points. I'll let you have a look at it. Now, this is something, again, it's in the gray zone of ethics. I'm not sure if everyone does it. My other recommended, Professor Abhijit Gupta, certainly did not do it. I'm again not technically clear on the rules about this, but
but I don't know that what Professor Paranjpe did, but your prospective referee, even if they've taught you for some time, they will certainly ask you for a short note.
Yeah.
At least that's what happens here as well. I'm going to be going to the job into the job market soon, and when I'm approaching referees as well, they ask me to send them a short note on any recent updates on achievements and things like that. So that's only done even in India with professors who also know you very well.
Yeah. So the recommendation matters. In Makaran's case, Professor Paranjpe's case, it was a glowing one because I'd done a lot of work for him. I have no idea what Professor Gupta wrote for me, but it worked. I think to some extent also it matters. Now here, uh, there are factors. Look, firstly, the recommendation is not the most important thing as far as I know. Bhagya. It's more
I
important
think
than
it is
marks.
important. I think it's
Yeah.
as important as other aspects like your proposal as well as the writing sample.
Potentially,
But I
okay,
mean,
yeah.
it's not, you can't really allocate specific
Yeah,
weightage for each of these
exactly,
portions.
exactly.
I think holistically, how your profile appears will matter
Right.
more than any individual.
Yeah, and here it does help if you are obviously if you've done MPhil work with or your ME work with someone who's a very senior figure. And here I suppose you kids, it's a fairly new university, so you're at a slight disadvantage, but I don't think it makes a huge difference because we are all fairly early career scholars, apart from Chetan Das. So the point is that a little, if your supervisor at the MPhil level or someone you work with is some kind of a celebrity, then I suppose that would give you some advantage in terms of your application, right? What do you think about that? Who was your MPhil
Yeah, I
supervisor?
mean, we're
Did you
in
reach out
really in the realm of
Professor?
speculation here.
Yeah, we are
I
in the
mean,
realm
I
of
don't think you should necessarily think too much about these things. Just do your best in the aspects of your application that you can control, and that really will
agreed.
hold you in good stead.
Agreed. Any more questions at this stage? I have a few more questions for
Yeah, I
Bhagya.
wanted to ask a question.
Go ahead, Pallavi.
Yeah, so my question was that how do you structure your SOP, statement of purpose, and with the SOP, do you attach an abstract consisting of say 500 to 600 words that sum up your proposal? And so, yeah, so that's my question.
Okay. So the SOP and the pieces of your application that you submit to a UK university or a US university will differ drastically. For a US university, the statement of purpose is what is required. They don't ask you for a proposal. So you can hint towards what you might want to work on in a full-fledged research project once you start the research part of your PhD. But primarily what they want to know is your prior academic expertise, academic training, academic expertise. So if you've been taught a particular set of subjects within the broader domain of literature, do mention those things. And also term papers that you might have written, you may want to highlight. Or if you have done a larger research project like a dissertation at the master's level or the MPhil level, then you would also have to mention that because that will establish your research expertise and you're growing or the direction you're moving towards in terms of research interests. So that's what you need to highlight in the US SOP. But I think the more important thing you need to do there is also establish that your research interests make you a good fit for the department that you're applying to. So if you can perhaps mention some faculty members and talk about their research expertise and how you'll benefit from being trained by them, and also contribute to the faculty, so it goes both ways. So those things need to be spoken about in the SOP for the US PhD application. For the UK one, I don't remember writing an SOP. Did you write an SOP? I don't think I wrote.
So I guess this is again dependent entirely on the university. There's no sort of uniform system. So in my case, the first thing I did was, because I applied for the fellowship, right? So I didn't have to send a pre-application. I did in fact. So I saw the fellowship, I saw the thing being advertised, then I wrote an email to Daniel, my supervisor, because with that proposal, with the funding proposal, it said this project will be supervised by Professor Daniel Roberts. So then I found his email ID and I basically wrote him a pre-application mail. And what I'll do for any interested students, certainly those who work for me, I'll happily send you all my pre-apps, the ones that failed in the US as well as the one that succeeded to Queen. So you have some idea of the structure of it. Pallavi was asking specifically about the structure of it. So I'll tell you. Pre-application email, the one that I sent to Daniel, it gave a brief summary of what I've done. Now, particularly, see, my project was a very specific case because they already said what it will be on. When I wrote that pre-application email to Daniel, I did everything in my power to stress those particular aspects. So the topic was on Indian literature in translation, all right, or Indian religious literature. So when I wrote Daniel the pre-application email, it stressed that I have done a course in my MPhil on the Indian epics, on Mahabharata, Ramayana. I stressed that Indianness and my interest in religion throughout. So I tailored it that way. And that was my pre-app. And he said, yes, you are an interesting candidate. Why don't you send a formal application? So then I sent the formal application. And over there, I had to give a detailed, there's a term for it. It's basically a kind of proposal. So you have to give, you don't have to, because again, it was a pre-given topic. They expected some level of detail, but it was both a summary of my previous experience and how my experiences and my academic interests have made me a suitable candidate for this university, for this department with its specializations, and for this professor, and for this topic. In my case, the topic was also given. But in most places, as far as I know, in your proposal, you basically give some account of what you've done so far, your interests, and then you stress how there is an overlap between your interests and this particular supervisor's areas of interest. Right?
Yeah, that's largely similar for UK applications. I can't quite remember if I wrote the cover letter, but I'm sure some form of cover letter will be essential even for a UK application. But the most important bit is the proposal. So you'll be asked to attach and upload a 500 to 1,000 word proposal, which gives an expansive idea of what exactly your proposal entails, and which should also show that you've covered your bases, you've done the research required to make the claims that you're making, and to also establish that you will be making an original intervention to the field.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. So that's it. Basically, Pallavi, short answer is that there's no fixed format. Again, you have to do a bit of digging around, but almost everywhere there's some kind of a proposal that you have to write. Okay. And no, there's no abstract. You don't need to write an abstract for it. Okay, anyone else? Okay, if there's no more questions, I'll ask Bhagya a few final questions. It's nearly dinner time for us also. I won't keep you long, Bhagya.
Yeah.
It must be getting, it's quite a long session already. But yeah, so any kind of things you want to say about PhD life, highlights or challenges, maybe if you could talk for a few minutes about that. Whatever you would like.
I mean, you should just be prepared. If you're serious about going elsewhere, you should be prepared for quite a few highs and a fair few lows, I think, because the biggest challenge is to just get acclimatized to a different world, academic world. And I took some time to find my footing here. So like we were talking about earlier, the first year was just essentially figuring out where I was positioned in the university, in my department, etc. But second year onwards, I mean, I became a little surer of my footing, and I think the fact that I was also doing teaching second year onwards really helped as well, because if you're just in a dissertation oriented PhD program, it can become quite monotonous very quickly. So the most important thing is to make sure that you structure your social life in such a way that your dissertation should of course remain the crux of your academic life in the university, but at the same time, of course, pay attention to your mental health and give enough space and time for yourself to do other things, cultivate other interests, and do things like teach a lot as well, because that will enable you to construct a more holistic academic persona.
Absolutely, I agree. So, I mean, for me, I had the same kind of challenges. The PhD life abroad, I mean, yes, the academic side is there, but you really have to make sure that you're comfortable, you settle in, you have a good community, because you can feel. So Oxford, England in general is very multicultural, and you shouldn't have any issues settling in as a foreigner. But for me particularly, and you may have a similar experience if you go to more obscure places. I'm just muting you guys for a bit. You may have challenges if you are in slightly less kind of cosmopolitan areas. So Belfast it's a kind of a more or less biggish city, but it's been recently developing, last 20 years. So what you have is that the university is a very liberal and multicultural space, but the rest of the place maybe not so much. And what I found is, because it was such a kind of white majority place, 98% white, so I did have certain issues weighing on my mind. And I may have talked about this to you guys, an essay, a non-fiction published about the challenges that I face. So I can talk to you separately about that. But my bigger point is that mental health and social issues fitting in, feeling like you have a community, is such a kind of important part of the whole thing.
Yeah,
So,
and one last thing, of course, while you're doing research about which department to be affiliated with and also talking to prospective supervisors, I think it's very important not just to speak to your prospective supervisor, but also try to get in touch with their students. And most supervisors will be willing to put you in touch with a few of their students, graduate students who will be completely willing to have a conversation with you about them. And I'm not sure what degree of transparency you can expect from such conversations, but do push for as much transparency as possible, because I've also heard very almost horror stories about how some students have just not gotten along with supervisors they haven't met before. And that's certainly a risk that's entailed in the UK academic sphere more than the US one, because in the US, at least, you have 2 years to really gauge the kind of faculty that you can potentially work with. As opposed to the UK, you just start off with a supervisor who you plausibly have never met before. So do your groundwork, do your research before, because it really will impact you.
So I did the same thing, but I got in touch with someone after I got my acceptance, and this is an Indian student at Queen's, and she gave me the whole lowdown, and she did say Daniel's a very nice guy. So I was very lucky. He's one of the nicest people I've ever met, and she said that all along. But see, the UK system, at least in Queen's, there are checks and balances. If you don't get along with your supervisor, if you have horror stories, and I've heard horror stories, okay, people in higher studies were all psychopaths. I'm telling you, it's you know, though. So there have been experiences, my batch, one person, I'm not naming names, but her supervisor and her just didn't get along. It was like fights. She was from Northern Ireland, supervisor also from Northern Ireland, and they hated each other. But what there is that at the end of your first year, when you're giving that first hurdle exam, your viva, first mini viva, whatever you call it, differentiation for us, you have 5 minutes before the whole process begins, where you are allowed to air any grievances that you have. And if you have issues with your supervisor, you can request a supervisor change. So that in fact happened to this girl. She requested a supervisor change and she got reallocated to someone else. So, that may become a problem if your area is such a niche area that no one else can guide you. I didn't have any problems. Daniel's a super nice guy, but hote pare, and this is one of the things you should do. Get in touch, do your research, find out where there are systems. There's a website, America te at least ache, UK te nahi, but it's called Rate Your Professor. Now, I have my qualms about this entire kind of corporatization of education and giving a mark, 10 on whatever, 7 or 8 on 10 for your professor. But the point is, there are ways you can do some research and find out a little bit about them. So, yeah. Anyway, let's try and wrap up soonish. Okay, do you want to share, if you're comfortable sharing, Bhagya, anything about future plans, any immediate, what's it like right now? Where are you in your degree right now, and how are you feeling, and what's next?
Well, I'm almost towards the end of my degree, drawing to a close, because it's my 4th year, and this academic year culminates in October. So that's my hard deadline to submit the dissertation. I was actually supposed to submit sometime towards the end of this month, but because of the outbreak and related disruptions, I just don't have access to libraries anymore. I think there's been a bit of a delay, but I'll be done with it soon, and I'll submit as soon as possible and go on the job market around fall. So that's August, September-ish.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, I submitted PhD. Having a PhD submitted is when you can actually start applying for jobs and have a good chance of being shortlisted and nominated for a position. So yeah, I'll be starting applications for either postdocs or lectureships.
Similarly, so with the Indian system, when you're applying here for jobs, many places will not say PhD compulsory, but they will say PhD desired. So that's what the Xavier's application said. I didn't get it the first time, possibly because I didn't have a PhD, but then nor did Prodo. She's the one who got it that time. Anyway, so who knows what employers think, but the point is that certainly it helps to have a PhD in hand when you're applying for jobs.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's pretty much it. So does anyone have any kind of questions? Then I'll unmute everyone. Hold on. Right? Any questions for Bhagya before we go? Anyone? Anything else? Okay, if you want, you can ask me things later as well. I'm always here. As you know, I have endless time, etc. Anyway, okay, so that's us, guys. So can we all say thank you to Bhagya for helping us out here? Okay.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
Thank
you.
you.
Thank
Thank you so
you.
much.
All right,
I
everyone.
hope this is
See you.
helpful.
Yeah,
And
Yeah,
good
yeah.
it
luck with
was.
your applications if they're imminent.
Okay, I'll stop the